I walked down to Silverpine Lake on a Wednesday morning with 14 laminated signs and a staple gun. Each sign said the same thing: private property, no trespassing, and I posted one on every single dock in the development. 14 docks, 32 homeowners, 1 lake, and every drop of it belonged to me. The HOA president had spent 8 years charging residents $210 a month for lake access she never had the right to sell. She tore out my grandfather's dock while I was deployed overseas. She gave my shoreline to her cousin for $1. She slapped a fake condemnation notice on my cabin door and blocked the road so I couldn't reach my own property. She thought she ran that lake. But my grandfather bought the entire lake bed in 1957. Every deed he ever signed to developers kept the water rights in his name. And when he died, those rights passed to me. The court confirmed it. The sheriff enforced it. And on that Wednesday morning, I made sure every person in Silverpine Shores understood exactly who they'd been paying and exactly who actually owned the water. Tell me below, would you have posted those signs or kept it quiet? But let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand what Silverpine Lake really was and who built it before you can understand what Denise Warwick tried to steal. My grandfather's name was Walt Beckett. He came from a logging family that had worked the forests of northern Michigan since before anyone was keeping proper records. In 1957, Walt scraped together $8,300 and bought 200 acres of unbroken woodland surrounding a glacial Lake 6 mi outside Traverse City. Silverpine Lake, 42 acres of clear, cold water ringed by white pine and paper birch. Not another structure in sight. Walt built the cabin himself. Hand-honeyed logs cut from trees he felled on the property. Cedar shake roof. A stone fireplace with a chimney that leaned slightly east because Walt was a better woodsman than he was a mason. He sank a dock into the shallows on the south shore, rough-cut planks over creosote pilings, and he lived there with my grandmother until she passed in 1981. After that, he lived alone, just Walt the lake, and a succession of bird dogs who all answered to the name Chief. The pine needles piled thick on that cabin roof every autumn. Lake mist rolled in at dawn and did not burn off until 9. Loons nested on the far shore, and their calls echoed across the water at dusk like something from another century. I spent every summer there as a kid. Walt taught me to fish for walleye with a slip bobber. Taught me to read the water where the thermocline sat, where the bass held in July, where the pike ambushed bait fish near the weed line. Here is what mattered about Walt. The man was meticulous. As Traverse City grew and the surrounding area developed, real estate people came knocking. They wanted lakefront parcels. Walt obliged. He sold land in pieces over 30 years. 5 acres here, 8 acres there, eventually enough for an entire subdivision. But every single deed Walt signed contained one clause that never changed. Grantor reserves all rights to the lake bed, submerged lands, and riparian access of Silverpine Lake. Every deed, every sale. No exceptions. Walt knew exactly what he had. He knew that the lake bed itself was the real asset. The land around it could change hands. The water would not. He died 2 years ago at 89, sitting in his favorite chair on the cabin porch, looking at the lake. He left everything to me: the cap, the accords that remained, and the lake bed rights that no buyer had ever challenged. I am Sawyer Beckett, 35, Air National Guard C-130 pilot out of a base downstate. No wife, no kids. Just the cabin, a golden retriever named Huck, and a deployment schedule that kept me gone more than I liked. Most weekends I could manage. I drove north and spent 2 days on the lake. Huck would swim until his legs gave out. I would sit on the porch with a coffee and listen to the water hit the dock pilings, the same way it had since I was 8 years old. The cabin smelled like cedar and old wool blankets and the faint char from the fireplace. It smelled like Walt. It smelled like the only home I had ever really known. 8 years before I deployed, a developer bought the largest chunk of Walt's former land and built Silverpine Shores. 32 luxury homes marketed as premier lakefront living. They formed an HOA. A woman named Denise Warwick moved in, appointed herself president, and immediately began complaining that my grandfather's cabin was lowering property values. Rustic was the word she used. She meant it as an insult. Walt would have taken it as a compliment. When I got orders for Ramstein, 8 months in Germany, I left Huck with my neighbor Ray Stanton and padlocked the cabin. Ray was a retired Michigan DNR game warden who lived in the old caretaker cottage next door. He promised to keep an eye on things. I trusted him completely. What I did not trust was the woman in the white Escalade who had been circling my property line like a real estate vulture for the past 3 years. I should have trusted that instinct more. The flight home from Germany took 13 hours. A layover in Philadelphia and a rental car from the airport in Traverse City. I drove north on M72 with the windows cracked, breathing in cold Michigan air that smelled like wet pine and wood smoke. It was late October. The birch trees had turned gold. The maples were deep red against the steel gray sky. I had not seen autumn in 8 months, and it hit me like a homecoming should. The 2-lane road narrowed past Elk Rapids. Gravel shoulders replaced asphalt. Pine branches scraped the roof of the rental car. I could smell the lake before I saw it. That cold mineral scent of deep water meeting October air. Every mile felt like a year unwinding. I rolled past the old bait shop on County Road 616 and felt my chest loosen for the first time since Ramstein. Then I pulled into my driveway. The first thing I noticed was the sticker, bright orange, plastered across the center of my front door like a quarantine notice, condemned, uninhabitable, by order of Silverpine Shores Homeowners Association, dated 7 months ago, 3 months after I deployed. I peeled it off and read the fine print. It cited structural deterioration, failure to maintain exterior standards, and abandonment of the premises. It carried the signature of Denise Warwick, HOA president. I walked around the cabin. Pine needles carpeted the porch in a thick brown mat. Cobwebs stretched across the door frame, but the structure was fine. The roof was solid. The windows were intact. The porch sagged slightly on the north end. It had sagged that way since 1974. The structural deterioration was nonsense. The cabin was not beautiful. It was not modern. But it was built from hand-honeyed logs by a man who understood load-bearing walls better than any developer in that subdivision. Then I looked at the lake. My dock was gone, Walt's dock. The dock he built in 1971 with rough-cut cedar planks and creosote pilings that had stood in that water for over 50 years ripped out. The pilings were pulled. Holes in the lake bed where they had been. In its place sat a gleaming aluminum boat lift, the permanent kind, with electric motors and adjustable bunks. Warwick was painted on the crossbar in white block letters. Lyle Warwick's 24 FT pontoon boat sat on that lift like it owned the shoreline. My property markers were gone too. I walked the perimeter in disbelief. The old iron pins Walt had set when he surveyed the parcel in 1960 pulled out every single one, replaced by new survey stakes with orange plastic flags. And those new stakes marked a property line that put my entire waterfront inside something labeled HOA Common Area, Silverpine Shores. The cold air off the lake carried the smell of dying leaves and wet sand. I stood at what used to be my shoreline and stared at another man's boat on another man's lift in the place where my grandfather's dock had stood for half a century. I called Ry. He answered on the second ring. "Sawyer, you home?" "I'm standing in front of Lyle Warwick's boat lift on my property," Ry exhaled. "She did it about 3 months after you left. Brought in a crew, 4 guys with a barge. Trior out the dock in one morning. Told everyone you had abandoned the property and forfeited your lake access. She told people I abandoned it. She told people a lot of things. That the cabin was condemned. That you had defaulted on some kind of HOA assessment. That the board voted to reclaim your shoreline for community use." I looked at the orange sticker in my hand. This condemnation sticker. It is on HOA letterhead, I know. The HOA has no authority to condemn a structure. Only the county building department can issue a condemnation order. This is a fake document. Ray paused. "I know that too." I told her that when she posted it. She said the board had enforcement authority under their covenants. Their covenants do not cover my property. My cabin is not in their subdivision. I told her that as well. I crumpled the orange sticker and shoved it in my jacket pocket. The aluminum boat lift caught the pale autumn sun and threw glare across the water. Somewhere on the far shore, a loon called. It was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. "Ray, where's Huck on my couch, waiting for you?" At least somebody was protecting what mattered. I found Denise Warwick the next morning. She was not hard to locate. The white Escalade was parked in the Silverpine Shores clubhouse lot right in the spot marked President Reserved. I walked in through the front door without knocking. The clubhouse was everything the cabin was not. Vaulted ceilings, engineered hardwood floors, a granite top bar with copper fixtures, the kind of place that screamed money without whispering taste. Denise was sitting at a conference table with a stack of papers and a laptop. Her blonde bob freshly styled. Her nails painted a shade of coral that probably had a name like Tuscan Sunrise. She looked up. Her reading glasses sat on a beaded chain around her neck. A ceramic mug that read Lake Life steamed beside her laptop. The entire room smelled like vanilla candle and fresh paint. "Can I help you? You can explain why your cousin's boat lift is on my property," she smiled. The kind of smile that suggested she had been rehearsing for this conversation. "The board voted to reclaim abandoned lakefront for community use. Your cabin was unoccupied and deteriorating. We exercised our authority under Article 9 of the Community Covenants. Your covenants do not apply to my property. My parcel is not part of Silverpine Shores. The lakefront is a shared community resource." She said my name like she was correcting a child. "The board determined that your neglect was impacting the aesthetic and recreational value of the shoreline." The board determined. I leaned against the doorframe. The copper fixtures on the granite bar caught the morning light. "Everything in this room costs more than Walt's cabin. Show me the resolution." She produced a document without hesitation. Board Resolution 2024-7. Reclamation of abandoned lakefront. Beckett parcel. 5 signatures. Denise Warwick, President. Lyle Warwick, Treasurer. 3 other board members I did not recognize. The resolution authorized the removal of derelict structures my dock, and the transfer of dock rights to Lyle Warwick for community benefit purposes. "What was the purchase price?" I asked. $1. "It is a community benefit transaction. Lyle maintains the dock area for the use of all residents. $1. She sold my lakefront to her cousin for a single $1. The dock Walt built, the shoreline Walt owned, the property I inherited. $1. Why was I not notified?" Denise tilted her head. The smell of her car's leather interior drifted through the open clubhouse door, mixing with the sharp scent of new carpet. "We sent notice to your address of record." My cabin address. The cabin I was not in because I was deployed to Germany. "We are not responsible for your mail forwarding arrangements," she knew. Every person in this neighborhood knew I was deployed. I had told them. My car had been gone for months. The cabin was padlocked with a combination lock Walt bought in 1988. The driveway had been empty since March. She timed the entire operation for my absence. She waited until I was 4,000 m away flying cargo runs over the Atlantic before she made her move. Here's what Denise did not know. 2 things actually. The Service Members Civil Relief Act. The SC is a federal law that protects active duty military members from having their property seized, foreclosed on, or adversely acted upon while they are deployed. The law has teeth. It carries damages. Denise's little $1 sale happened while I was on military orders, and she knew it. That alone was enough to unwind everything she did. But the second thing was bigger. The HOA never owned my lakefront to begin with. My cabin sits on a separate parcel, the original homestead lot that Walt kept when he sold the surrounding acreage. That parcel was never platted into the Silverpine Shores subdivision. It was never subject to their covenants, their bylaws, or their board resolutions. The HOA had exactly as much authority over my dock as it had over the International Space Station. Denise sold property she did not own to her own cousin for $1 using a board she controlled while the actual owner was serving overseas. In Michigan, selling property you do not own is called fraudulent conveyance. It is not a gray area. It is not a misunderstanding. It is fraud. I left the clubhouse without another word. Her Escalade idled behind me in the parking lot, the engine humming with the confidence of a woman who believed she was untouchable. The gravel crunched under my boots. Pine sap stuck to the handrail on the clubhouse steps. Some people mistake silence for surrender. I was not surrendering. I was reading the deed. I filed a police report with the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office the following day. Theft and destruction of property. The dock Walt built was worth at least $12,000 in materials alone, and the labor to replace it would triple that number. The deputy took the report, wrote everything down, and then leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like a property dispute to me," he said. "A woman destroyed my dock and gave my lakefront to her cousin, right? A property dispute. You will want to talk to a lawyer. I thanked him for his time. He was not wrong, but it still burned. The fluorescent lights in the sheriff's office hummed. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my truck for 10 minutes before starting the engine. Denise responded within 48 hours. Not with an apology, not with an offer to negotiate. She responded with fines. A letter arrived at the cabin, hand-delivered by Lyle himself, who dropped it in my mailbox without making eye contact. The letter assessed $75 per day in blight fines against my property. The violations cited were structural deterioration, overgrown landscaping, and unauthorized waterfront access. The fines were retroactive to month 2 of my deployment. 7 months at $75 per day. Total $13,500. Unauthorized waterfront access. She was fining me for accessing my own waterfront. The waterfront she stole. 2 days later, I drove down to the cabin and found the road blocked. The access road to my property, a gravel lane that Walt built in 1962, cutting through what was now HOA common land, had 3 concrete jersey barriers across it, yellow tape, a sign reading road closed, HOA maintenance, no unauthorized vehicles. I had to park on the county road and walk 400 yards through the woods to reach my own cabin. In October, through wet leaves and mud, carrying groceries, Ray met me at the tree inn. His face was the color of a man, trying not to say something he would regret. She blocked a private road that Walt built with his own equipment 62 years ago. Ray said that road existed before her subdivision was a blueprint on a developer's desk. I know Rai. She's going to keep pushing until you push back, I know that too. I spent that evening in the cabin attic. Walt's attic. I climbed the pull-down ladder and ducked under a cross-beam worn smooth by decades of contact. A low-ceiling space that smelled like old cedar and mouse droppings, lit by a single 40-watt bulb and the pale light, filtering through a tiny window that faced the lake. Dust floated in the yellow light. A barn spider had built a web between 2 filing boxes. Walt's old fishing rod, a split bamboo fly rod from the 1960s, leaned against the chimney stack. Walt kept everything. Tax records from the 1960s, receipts for lumber, correspondence with the county surveyor, and deed boxes. Heavy cardboard filing boxes with dates written on the lids in Walt's careful block print. I opened the one marked 1957, original purchase. The deed was there. I lifted it carefully. Yellow paper, brittle at the edges, typed on a manual typewriter with the county recording stamp in the upper right corner. It smelled like old newsprint and cedar shavings. The legal description ran 3 pages. I read it twice. Then I read it a 3rd time. Walt did not just own the shoreline. He owned the lake bed, all of it. The deed described the parcel as including all submerged lands lake bed, and riparian rights pertaining to the body of water commonly known as Silver Pine Lake. Every acre of mud, sand, gravel, and organic sediment beneath 42 acres of water belonged to my grandfather, and now it belonged to me. Under Michigan law, the bed of an inland lake can be privately owned if the ownership was established before certain public trust determinations took effect. The Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act governs the Great Lakes, but inland lakes are different. If the deed predates the relevant statutory framework and the chain of title is clean, private ownership of an inland lake bed is valid and enforceable. Walt's 1957 deed was bulletproof. I sat in that attic with the deed in my hands and the cold October air seeping through the window frame. The 40W bulb flickered once. Pine sap popped somewhere in the roof joints. Outside, Lyle Warwick's boat lift caught the last light of sunset, its aluminum frame glowing orange against the darkening water. 14 boats floated on a lake that belonged to me. Every single one of them was trespassing. Colleen Havford's office sat on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian on Front Street in Traverse City. Her windows overlooked Grand Traverse Bay. The staircase creaked with every step, and the hallway smelled like old wood polish and radiator heat. Her door was frosted glass with gold lettering that read Havford Law. Water rights and real property. She specialized in water rights and real property. The kind of attorney who read riparian law for pleasure and considered easement disputes a recreational activity. Bookshelves lined every wall. Leather-bound volumes of Michigan property code stood shoulder to shoulder with academic papers on Great Lakes, environmental law. A framed survey map of Grand Traverses Bay hung behind her desk. I placed Walt's deed on her desk. She put on reading glasses, opened the document, and did not speak for 4 minutes. The radiator ticked in the corner. Traffic murmured on Front Street below. I watched her eyes track left to right across the legal description, then stop. Then go back and read it again. Where did you get this? She asked. My grandfather's attic. And you are the sole heir, confirmed through probate 2 years ago. Colleen pulled up the county records on her computer. She traced the chain of title from Walt's 1957 purchase through every subsequent sale. There were 9 transactions over 30 years, 9 parcels sold to various buyers, and every single deed contained the same reservation clause. Grantor reserves all rights to the lake bed, submerged lands, and riparian access of Silverpine Lake. Not one buyer had ever challenged it. Not one title company had flagged it. Not one real estate attorney had raised an objection in 30 years of sales. The clause was there in plain language in every recorded document. Walt's ownership of the lake bed had survived 9 transfers without a single legal challenge. It was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Your grandfather owned the lake bed. Colleen said you own the lake bed. Every dock, boat, lift, swim platform, and mooring buoy on Silverpine Lake is sitting on your private property. Her coffee had gone cold. Mine had too. It gets better, she continued. She pulled up the Silverpine Shores HOA financial disclosures. The HOA charges a $210 monthly lake amenity fee to every homeowner, 32 homes. That is $6,720 per month, $80,640 per year. They have been collecting that fee for 8 years, $645,120. That was how much the HOA had collected in lake amenity fees since the subdivision was built. Fees for access to a lake they did not own. Fees that went into an operating budget controlled by Denise Warwick. She has been selling tickets to someone else's movie theater, Colleen said. She leaned back in her chair and let that sentence hang in the air between us like smoke. Outside, a gull screamed over the bay. I could hear traffic on Front Street 2 floors below and the tick of the old building settling into its bones. I stared out the window at Grand Traverse Bay. Sailboats rocked at their moorings. The water was the same cold blue as Silverpine Lake, just bigger. Somewhere back at the cabin, Huck was probably sleeping on Ray's couch. Somewhere back at the subdivision, Denise Warwick was probably planning her next move against my property. She had no idea what was in that deed. She had never bothered to read it. She assumed that owning a house on a lake meant owning the lake, in Michigan. That assumption can cost you everything. What do we do? I asked. Colleen closed the deed and placed both hands flat on her desk. Her office was quiet. The radiator had stopped ticking. Grand Traverse Bay glittered through the window. Indifferent to the small wars people fought over smaller bodies of water. We take the lake back. Colleen Havford did not waste time. Within 72 hours, she had mapped out a legal strategy with 7 moving parts, each one designed to tighten the noose around Denise Warwick's carefully manicured neck. First, a quiet title action filed in Grand Traverse County Circuit Court asking the judge to formally confirm Sawyer Beckett's ownership of the Silverpine Lake bed and all submerged lands. A quiet title action is a legal proceeding that establishes clear ownership of a property when there is any dispute or cloud on the title. In Michigan, it is the standard tool for resolving ownership questions, and it forces every party with a potential claim to either prove it or lose it. We were not asking the court to give us something. We were asking the court to confirm what Walt's deed already said. Second, a counterclaim against the Silverpine Shores HOA for trespass, conversion of property, the destruction of my dock, and 8 years of unauthorized commercial use of private land. Every dock on that lake, every boat lift, every swim platform, all of it sitting on my lake bed without permission, without a lease, and without compensation. Third, a report to the county prosecutor flagging the $1 sale of my dock rights to Lyle Warwick as fraudulent conveyance. You cannot sell property you do not own. The HOA never owned my shoreline. The transfer to Lyle was void on its face. Fourth, a formal SC complaint, the fine, the condemnation sticker, the road blockade, and the dock seizure all occurred while I was on active duty military orders. The Service Member Civil Relief Act does not politely suggest that you leave deployed soldiers' property alone. It demands it, and it provides for actual damages, attorney's fees, and in some cases punitive damages. And this one required a phone call, not a filing. I reached out to Gwen Prescott. Gwen was a Silver Pine Shores board member, former environmental scientist, quiet, careful. She had served on the board for 3 years and increasingly resented Denise's control. When I called, she was cautious at first. Then I told her what the deed said. I was uncomfortable with the dock transfer, Gwen said. I told Denise it felt wrong. She said it was routine maintenance reallocation. Standard procedure. There is no such thing as routine maintenance reallocation of someone else's dock. Gwen paused. She planned it before you deployed. I have emails. She was discussing the timeline with Lyle 2 weeks before you left for Germany. Autumn leaves scraped across the gravel outside the cabin. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine resin and the distant sound of a boat motor on the lake. My lake, 6th. I drove to the county building in Traverse City and found Stu Vickers at the Register of Deeds. Stu was the kind of county employee who had been there so long he had become part of the furniture, quiet, thorough, and capable of locating a document from 1957 faster than most people could find their car keys. He pulled every transfer document connected to the Silver Pine Lake Parcels 9 deeds. Every one contained the reservation clause. Stu made certified copies of all 9 and stamped them with the county seal. Your grandfather was a careful man, Stu said. He placed the stack of certified copies on the counter and squared the edges with his palms. He was a logger who read more law than most lawyers. 7th, I installed security cameras on the cabin. 4 units covering every approach. 1 on the porch eave, 1 on the north wall facing the access road, 1 aimed at the shoreline, and 1 at the tree line where the HOA property began. If Denise or Lyle or anyone else came near my property again, I wanted it documented in high definition with timestamps. Ray helped me run the wiring through the crawl space beneath the cabin floor. He also spent a full day on the lake in his canoe, documenting every boat, every dock, and every structure sitting on the lake bed. 14 boats, 14 unauthorized vessels on private property. That evening, I drove to the small cemetery on the hill east of the lake. Walt's grave sat under a birch tree. The headstone's simple, Walter H. Beckett, 1934 to 2023. Silver Pine forever. Autumn leaves covered the base. The cold lake wind cut through my jacket. I could hear the distant putt-putt of a pontoon boat on the water below. They took the dock, Grandpa, but they did not read the deed. The birch leaves rattled overhead. I took that as agreement. Denise Warwick was served with the quiet title lawsuit on a Tuesday afternoon. The process server found her in her Escalade at the Silver Pine Shores mailbox kiosk, sorting through what appeared to be a stack of home decorating catalogs. She read the first page of the complaint, and according to the process server's notes, she said a word that would have gotten her expelled from her own HOA if anyone had been recording. By Thursday, she had called an emergency meeting of the Silver Pine Shores homeowners. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled. Folding chairs scraped against the engineered hardwood as 32 households worth of anxious lakefront homeowners tried to understand what was happening to their property values. Denise stood at the front of the room, her voice pitched somewhere between righteous indignation and barely controlled panic. Sawyer Beckett is trying to steal the lake from the community. He has filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming he owns the lake bed. This is nothing more than a revenge action by a disgruntled neighbor who refuses to maintain his property. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed. Someone in the back row coughed. A woman I did not recognize raised her hand. Can he actually own a lake? Denise smiled her practiced smile. Of course not. This is America. Lakes are public resources. Except they are not. Not in Michigan. Not when the deed says otherwise. But Denise was not interested in legal nuance. She was interested in keeping 32 households angry at me instead of curious about her. It worked. At least temporarily. Within a week, an anonymous note appeared on my cabin door. Block letters on plain white paper. Go back to your base. Someone had also keyed the word greedy into the tailgate of my truck while it was parked at the county road. I documented both incidents. The cameras caught a figure approaching the cabin at night, but the resolution was not clear enough for identification. Denise hired an attorney, a property lawyer from Paskey named Hadley Burke. Burke filed a response to the quiet title action, arguing that the lake bed reservation clause in Walt's deeds was antiquated, ambiguous, and unenforceable as applied to modern community development. He cited no case law. He cited no statute. He cited the general principle that things should be fair, which is not actually a legal doctrine. Meanwhile, Lyle Warwick responded to the lawsuit by doing the exact opposite of what any rational person would do. He refused to remove the boat lift. Then he added a second boat, a bass boat with a trolling motor tied to the aluminum lift with dock line. 2 vessels now sat on my lake bed. Lyle's own quiet form of defiance, guided by a cousin who had assured him this would all blow over. Denise then tried to get the county to condemn my cabin through official channels. An actual building inspector from the Grand Traverse County Building Department drove out, walked through the cabin with a clipboard, and spent 40 minutes examining the foundation, the roof, the electrical panel, and the plumbing. His report: the cabin was rustic, but structurally sound. Original hand-honeyed log construction in good condition, roof solid, foundation stable, no safety violations, no condemnation warranted. He noted the HOA's fake condemnation sticker in his report and added a line that the county had not authorized it. Denise's nuclear option had fizzled, but Gwen Prescott had not. Quietly, without telling Denise, Gwen pulled the HOA financial records she had access to as a board member. She copied them onto a flash drive and brought them to Colleen Havford's office on a Friday afternoon. The numbers were devastating. The lake amenity fee, $210 per month from 32 homes, had generated $645,120 over 8 years. Of that amount, $180,000 had gone to legitimate lake maintenance, weed treatment, buoy placement, dock inspection by a third-party contractor, standard upkeep. The remaining $465,120 was unaccounted for, no receipts, no vendor invoices, no documented expenditures. The money flowed into the HOA operating account and then vanished into line items labeled Administrative Services and President's Discretionary Fund. Denise had been skimming the HOA for nearly $500,000 from fees collected for access to a lake she did not own. The birch trees outside the cabin had lost their leaves by then. The branches stood white and bare against the gray November sky like bones picked clean. The hearing on the quiet title action was scheduled for the second week of November. A cold front had moved through overnight. Ice rimmed the puddles in the courthouse parking lot. The wind off Grand Traverse Bay smelled like freezing water and diesel exhaust from the county plow trucks staged along the curb. Judge Eldon Tate presided. He was a circuit court judge with 30 years on the bench, a reputation for dry humor, and an intolerance for attorneys who wasted his time. The courtroom is wood-paneled, the kind of aging dignity that northern Michigan county buildings carry like a uniform. Denise sat at the defense table with Hadley Burke. She wore a navy blazer and pearls. Her hands rested flat on the table, but her fingers were not still. They drummed lightly on the surface, a nervous rhythm she probably did not realize she was broadcasting. Burke opened with his strongest argument. The reservation clause was outdated. He called it a relic of pre-development rural land transfers that had no application to a modern planned community. He argued that the homeowners of Silver Pine Shores had purchased their properties with the reasonable expectation of lake access and that enforcing the clause would cause irreparable economic harm to 32 families. Judge Tate listened without expression. Then he asked one question. Was the clause recorded with the County Register of Deeds at the time of each sale? Burke hesitated. It was, Your Honor, but the buyers were not made aware of its implications. The buyers had constructive notice through the recorded deed. That is how property law works, counselor. Next argument. Burke tried adverse possession. He straightened his tie and adjusted his tone. The community had openly used the lake for 8 years, continuous hostile, and notorious use of the lake bed should vest ownership in the HOA. Colleen stood. Michigan requires 15 years for adverse possession, Your Honor. The HOA has occupied the lake bed for 8. They are 7 years short. Judge Tate nodded. I can count next. Burke went for the public trust doctrine. Silver Pine Lake should be considered a public resource subject to the public trust regardless of the deed language. Colleen had anticipated this. Silver Pine Lake is a private inland lake with no navigable connection to public waterways. The public trust doctrine in Michigan applies to the Great Lakes and navigable waters. This lake qualifies as neither. The Michigan Supreme Court addressed this distinction directly in the Burt Lake case. Judge Tate made a note. Burke shuffled his papers. He had nothing left. Colleen presented her case methodically. The original 1957 deed with the lake bed description. the chain of title through 9 subsequent sales, each containing the identical reservation clause. Certified copies from Stu Vickers at the Register of Deeds. A current survey confirming the legal boundaries of the lake bed. The probate documents confirming Sawyer Beckett as sole heir to Walt Beckett's estate. Then she presented the SC evidence. My deployment orders, the timeline showing the dock destruction, the fake condemnation, the fines, and the road blockade, all occurred during active duty service. Military records confirming my station at Ramstein Air Base. Then she presented the financial records. Colleen placed a bound exhibit on the judge's bench. The $465,120 in unaccounted HOA funds. The lake amenity fees collected for access to property the HOA did not own. The $1 sale of dock rights from the HOA to the HOA treasurer's cousin. The scratch of Judge Tate's pen was the only sound in the courtroom. Denise's fingers had stopped drumming. They gripped the edge of the defense table now, her knuckles white beneath the coral nail polish. I have heard enough, Judge Tate said. The court grants the preliminary injunction. Petitioner's ownership of the Silver Pine Lake is confirmed pending final judgment. All unauthorized structures on the lake bed, including but not limited to the boat lift installed by Lyle Warwick, shall be removed within 30 days. Collection of the lake amenity fee is frozen, effective immediately pending investigation. Respondent's counsel may file whatever motions he deems appropriate, but I would advise him to read the deed first. Burke asked for a recess. Judge Tate looked over his glasses. You have had 8 years of recess, counselor. We are adjourned. Denise did not stand immediately. She sat at that table while the courtroom emptied. Burke gathered his papers without looking at her. The bailiff straightened the flags. A clerk collected exhibit binders. Denise stared at the wood grain as if it contained an escape route. It did not. The 30-day deadline fell on a Thursday in December. The first real snow had come and gone, leaving a thin white crust on the ground that crunched underfoot. Silver Pine Lake was not yet frozen. The water was dark and still, holding the cold like a promise it intended to keep. Lyle Warwick had not removed the boat lift. He had been warned. His attorney had been warned. The court order was explicit. But Lyle had apparently decided that ignoring a circuit court judge was a viable legal strategy. It was not. I arrived at the cabin at 7:00 in the morning. A court-ordered removal crew was already assembling at the shoreline. 3 men with a flatbed truck and a portable crane. 2 Grand Traverse County Sheriff's deputies stood near the water's edge, breath fogging in the cold air, their cruiser parked on the gravel turnaround that Walt built 50 years ago. The concrete Jersey barriers were gone. Removed the week before by the same sheriff's office after the court found they constituted illegal obstruction of a private road. The crew worked methodically. The aluminum boat lift came apart in sections. Uprights first, then crossbars, then the electric motor housing. Each piece clanged against the flatbed like a bell tolling for Denise Warwick's real estate empire. The sound carried across the water. Ly's pontoon boat was lowered off the bunks and towed behind a sheriff's department vessel to the public boat ramp 3 mi south. His bass boat followed. The entire neighborhood watched. They stood on their docks, their patios, their carefully landscaped lakefront yards, the yards they had paid premium prices for because of the premier lakefront lifestyle that Denise had promised. They watched the boat lift come down piece by piece. They watched the sheriff's deputies stand with their arms crossed. They watched and they understood perhaps for the first time that the lake they had been sold was not the lake they had purchased. Then I did something that made the silence deeper. I walked to the nearest dock on the Silver Pine Shores shoreline. I posted a notice. White paper laminated attached with zip ties to the dock post. Private property Silver Pine Lake bed access by permission of owner. Sawyer Beckett. I walked to the next dock. Same notice and the next, 14 docks, 14 notices. Every boat on Silver Pine Lake was now formally trespassing on my property. A woman in a bathrobe stepped onto her dock as I was zip-tying the notice. You cannot be serious. Read the deed, I said. Your developer should have told you. Denise came running from her house. No Escalade this time. On foot in yoga pants and a puffer jacket. Her blonde bob flattened on one side like she had just woken up. She stopped at the shoreline and screamed across the water. You cannot own a lake. This is America. Ray was standing on the cabin porch, Huck sitting beside him. He called back across the water with the calm authority of a man who had spent 30 years enforcing Michigan natural resource law. Actually, in Michigan you can. His grandfather made sure of it. The final judgment hearing came that Friday. Judge Tate's courtroom again. The wood paneling, the flags, the quiet authority of a place where words become legally binding. Judge Tate confirmed full ownership of the Silver Pine Lake bed to Sawyer Beckett. He awarded $89,000 in damages, $36,000 for dock replacement, $13,500 for recovery of illegally assessed fines, $22,000 for SC violations, and $17,500 in attorney's fees. He referred the $465,120 in unaccounted HOA funds to the Grand Traverse County prosecutor for criminal investigation. I stood before that bench and said nothing for a moment. Then I spoke. My grandfather bought this lake in 1957 because he believed some things should be protected by people who actually care about them. He was right. He was also a better lawyer than anyone in this HOA. Judge Tate almost smiled, almost. The court concurs with the second observation, at minimum. Case closed. The lake wind hit me when I walked out of the courthouse. December cold pine and wood smoke. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time. The engine running, the heater blowing. I thought about Walt sitting in that same courthouse in 1957, signing the original deed with a fountain pen and a handshake. He paid $8,300 for 200 acres and a lake. He spent the next 40 years selling the land piece by piece, and every single time he kept the water, not because he was greedy, because he understood that the lake was the real thing and everything else was just real estate. 69 years later, his grandson walked into the same courthouse and a judge confirmed what Walt always knew. The water does not forget who owns it. The flutter of 14 notices in the wind posted on 14 docks announced that Silver Pine Lake had come home. The emergency vote to remove Denise Warwick as HOA president took less than 15 minutes. 32 households, 29 voted to remove her, 2 abstained, 1 Lyle voted no. The margin was not close. It was an avalanche. Lyle moved away before Christmas, listed his home at a loss, and relocated to a rental in Cadillac. He did not say goodbye. His boat lift sat an impound at the county yard, gathering rust like a monument to poor judgment. Denise faced criminal charges. The county prosecutor filed embezzlement charges based on the $465,000 in unaccounted funds. Denise hired a defense attorney. Then she hired a different one. The case moved forward regardless. Gwen Prescott was elected the new HOA president by unanimous vote. She ran on a platform of transparency and what she called not committing crimes. The bar had been low and she cleared it easily. Now, here is the part of this story that separates it from simple revenge. I did not shut the lake down. I did not ban every boat. I did not put up gates and fences and no trespassing signs and live out my days as the bitter hermit guarding a body of water out of spite. That would have been easy. It also would have been wrong. Instead, I created the Walt Beckett Conservation Trust. Colleen drafted the documents. The trust granted the community permanent lake access docks, boats, swimming, fishing in exchange for conservation commitments. No motorboats over 10 horsepower. Catch and release on bass and pike. Phosphorus-free fertilizers within 200 feet of the shoreline. Annual water quality testing funded by the HOA. No permanent structures on the lake bed without trust approval. The community got better access than they ever had under Denise. Cleaner water, protected fisheries, the kind of stewardship Walt would have demanded. The HOA paid a nominal annual lease of $1, the same price Denise charged for my dock. A fitting piece of symmetry. The first resident to sign the conservation agreement was Gwen Prescott. She brought her own pen. Ray helped me rebuild the dock, not aluminum. Hand-honeyed cedar planks over treated pilings, the same design Walt used in 1971. We cut the lumber from trees on the property and spent 3 weekends sinking pilings and laying planks. The dock sat low to the water, close enough to reach down and feel the lake without standing up. I hung Walt's old fishing hat on a hook inside the cabin door. Sweat-stained and sun-faded. It had hung on that same hook for 40 years before I packed it away after the funeral. Back where it belonged. Huck claimed the porch. He sprawled on the worn cedar boards every morning, watching the mist lift off the lake, his tail thumping when the loons called from the far shore. The loons were back. They nested on the same marshy point where Walt had first shown them to me when I was 8 years old. Some things endure if you protect them. On the first warm evening after the dock was finished, Ray and I sat at the end of it with our lines in the water. The sun was going down behind the pines. The lake was glass. A lawn surface 30 yards out looked at us with its red eye and dove without a ripple. Your grandpa would be proud, Ray said. He would say I took too long. The creak of the new dock settled into the quiet. Stars appeared one by one over the pines. The smell of cedar rose from the planks beneath us, fresh and clean, the way Silver Pine Lake was always meant to smell. Somewhere out there, Denise was explaining to a second defense attorney why $465,000 had vanished into a line item called President's Discretionary Fund. And somewhere on the hill east of the lake, under a birch tree losing its last golden leaves, a simple headstone reading forever. If you have been through something like this, if someone took what was yours while you were away, do not give up. Read the deed, hire the right attorney, and remember that the people who steal from deployed soldiers have a way of underestimating the people they steal from. Like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next story, because next week we have an HOA president who tried to annex a family cemetery. She paved it for guest parking. The family was not amused. See you then.